I was about to sign a $500,000 check to the Golden Years nursing home when a nurse came hustling down the hall, practically dragging a 72-year-old black woman by the wrist. And the woman looked at me like she was waking up from a long storm and whispered, "Avid, my boy, my little builder." The pen froze in my hand, the fluorescent lights hummed, and a smell of lemon cleaner mixed with something old and sad, while the nurse muttered that her patient was confused, always talking about a son named David who got rich and never came back. I don't know why, but the name she gave, Rosa Johnson, put a crack straight through the life I'd been told to remember. I'm David Thompson, CEO, Comfortable Suits Skyline Offices, the adopted son of Richard and Margaret, the family in Chicago everyone knows, because they give money to the places where names get etched in brass. I grew up hearing a neat story. My nanny had personal problems. She left suddenly. I was 5. It was better this way. And I never asked too many questions because the house was big and the rules were soft and the holidays were photo perfect, you know what I mean. But when Rosa lifted her chin and found my eyes, something simple and warm came back: a kitchen radio oatmeal with too much cinnamon, a woman singing off key on purpose just to make me laugh, a cardboard castle I called home, and I heard myself ask, "What's going on here?" The head nurse, Patricia Wells, tried to wave me off. Severe dementia fantasies, disruptive. We're just putting her back in her room. Rosa squeezed the air like she was holding an invisible hand and said, "You stacked cereal boxes into little towers, baby, and when they fell you'd say, 'Mama Rosa, it needs stronger beams.'" The nurse gave me that tight smile people use when power is in the room. "Mr. Thompson, she does that to every man who visits. Let's not encourage it." I didn't walk away. I sat with Rosa in the day room under a painting of sunflowers that had never seen sun and asked the questions you ask when you're trying to prove a ghost is real. Who taught me to tie my shoes? What did I call the frying pan I wasn't supposed to touch? Which story put me to sleep on the bad nights? She answered without fishing, the same details my body remembered before my mind caught up. And when I asked what happened the day she left, her eyes went somewhere far and steady, and she said, "A man in a suit brought papers, said a black nanny was wrong for a white boy in a good house, said if I didn't leave quiet, they'd call it kidnapping." A name floated up, Charles Morrison, a lawyer who handled delicate adoptions for people who never got their hands dirty. I felt the floor tilt. Patricia tried to cut in, "Mr. Thompson, you're upsetting her. Let's talk about your generous donation." I put the check away and told Rosa I'd be back tomorrow. And that night in my penthouse, I stood over a glass of whiskey like it might answer something and called my assistant Jake. "I need everything on Patricia Wells," I said. "Who pays her? Who pays the clinic that shipped Rosa here, whether Morrison and Associates is still moving money?" 2 hours later, he called back and said the quiet part out loud. "Patricia gets an extra $2,000 a month from an offshore account controlled by Morrison's firm, and Rosa wasn't found wandering. She was transferred here after 25 years inside a private psych facility. Initial authorization signed by Richard Thompson." I dropped the glass. Yeah, that happened. The next morning, I brought in my own neurologist, Dr. Amanda Foster, cash retainer, no strings, and she sat with Rosa for 3 hours, asked memory questions, tracked pupils, read charts that smelled like dust and bleach, and then she looked at me and said, "This is not dementia, this is trauma, and years of heavy, inappropriate medication. Someone has been keeping her fogged on purpose." Patricia stood in the doorway and shrugged. "We follow medical orders, sir." And when I asked whose orders, she murmured, "Dr. Morrison." And when I asked who pays the invoices, she whispered what we both knew, Richard Thompson, through the foundation. On cue, my father called that night. David's son, your mother and I are worried you're getting drawn into a patient's fantasies. This is emotional. I know you'll do the right thing." And I asked him how he knew her medical details, and he paused just long enough for me to hear the lie and said, "We made inquiries out of concern." I hung up and called Michael Rodriguez, the best investigative lawyer in the city, a man who hates polite corruption more than I do. And in the morning he spread files across my conference table and said, "This is bigger than one family. We've got a pattern. Boutique adoption firm, friendly psychiatrist, a judge who signs on a Friday afternoon, caregivers labeled unstable children severed clean from inconvenient histories." And then he pointed at a spreadsheet and said, "From what I can trace, there are at least 15 cases in 40 years. I felt sick. We brought in prosecutor Janet Williams, a straight shooter with a long memory, and she looked at the evidence and said, "If half of this holds, I will pull the whole house down, but understand you're going to light your own life on fire." I told her the fire had already started. I was just deciding to stop pretending it was candlelight. We moved fast. Jake traced the payments, Michael drafted affidavits, Dr. Foster wrote a clean report that cut like glass, and Janet lined up warrants, while her team quietly mirrored hard drives and requested sealed medical records Patricia thought would never see air. Rosa stayed with me in the quiet hours, more lucid every day, without the drugs telling me names. Carmen, who vanished after caring for twins, Martha, who tried to sue and didn't live to see the hearing, and when I said I was scared, she took my hand and said, "Baby, I spent 3 decades being told my memories were a disease. Fear is just the last costume a lie wears before it runs." At 6:30 on a Tuesday morning, the city woke to unmarked cars and agents fanning out like chess pieces, and I watched from Janet's office as lines lit up. Team Alpha Richard Thompson in custody, Team Bravo Dr. Patricia Wells detained, Team Charlie documents seized at Morrison and Associates. And when Richard stepped onto his porch in a robe that looked expensive and useless, at the same time I felt a cold, clean calm that surprised me. He called from holding, "David, this is a misunderstanding. We loved you, we did what was best." And I said, "You wrapped lies in privilege and called it love. You bought silence with diagnoses. You stole a mother and locked her away," and the line went quiet except for his breathing. And that afternoon, Janet held a press conference. The cameras clustered like bees, and she laid it all out. Falsified medical charts, payments routed through foundations, 15 families patterned the same way. And by evening, justice. For Rosa was everywhere. Donors were calling to pretend they never sat at the same tables. Clinics were boarding up their reputations with press statements, and people who had lived on the wrong side of a closed door were telling their stories on courthouse steps. 3 days later, I moved Rosa into a warm, sunlit house with a kitchen big enough for cookies and a garden where she could hum to the plants. And when I asked how it felt, she said, "Like the air finally remembered my name." We turned Golden Year's West Wing into the Rosa Johnson Welcome Center, a place where people torn by the same machine could walk in and not be treated like a problem to be medicated. And we hired counselors who know the difference between confusion and the fog that follows cruelty, and a legal clinic that translates grief into filings and filings into daylight. 2 years on the foundation runs hotlines in 3 states. Michael trains young lawyers to hunt the paper trails. Janet is now the Attorney General and still answers my texts with one word: moving. And appeals have been denied. Richard will serve his time. Margaret lives in a quiet facility that finally respects consent. Patricia lost her license and works nights pushing a mop. And the truth is, I don't feel triumphant so much as steady, like a beam that finally sits where it should. There is a piece of this that won't let me sleep long. A file Michael found that suggests what we dismantled was only one branch of a tree, with deeper roots in other counties. And sometimes I sit with Rosa on the porch and don't say it yet, because rest is a kind of justice too. Then she looks at me like she can read my breath and says, "When you're ready, we'll go," and I nod, because she's the bravest person I know. People ask if I forgive Richard, and the honest answer changes depending on the weather. But what stays is this: I chose justice over revenge, because justice builds, while revenge just burns. And some days I think mercy belongs to the person who suffered most, not to the bystander who benefited, without knowing, you know what I mean. If you've stayed with me this far, tell me what you think. Did I do right by choosing the courts over the private hell I wanted for him? Where's the line between protecting a child and rewriting his history? Have you seen a system that looked clean outside and rotten inside? And what did you do about it? Drop your city and local time, share your take on justice versus forgiveness. Tell us if you've lived through something like this. And if this story hit a nerve, like subscribe, send it to someone who believes powerful people can make anything go away.